So, relax. You'll have done this the first time, I imagine. Just treat it as I do, advocacy. It's a bit of fun. Most of the time. Okay, so, you will put him on.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Your Honor. So we are here today in the case of the Crown and Thor Hammer. So if I could ask Thor Hammer to come to the witness stand. So the offence that Thor Hammer is charged with is assault occasioning bodily harm, contrary to Section 45 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861. The particulars of the offence are that on the 1st of December 2019, you, Thor Hammer, did assault Christy Irwin with the result that Mr. Irwin sustained bodily harm contrary to Section 45 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861. How do you plead?
Not guilty, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if I could just take a step back and just ask Mr.
I'm just going to make a comment.
Yeah.
There's no such offence as this, but it's actual bodily harm, so I make that note at the outset. Section 47, the offences against I imagine it's a typo, but we need to be right about it. Occasion actual bodily harm, not bodily harm. All right?
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Your Honor. If I could just ask you to confirm your name and address, please.
Thor Hammer, address is 15 Coronation Road, Bradford, BD9 4DJ.
And just to confirm again how you plead.
Not guilty.
Right, okay, thank you. Your case is sufficient if you want to. And I will hand over to you.
Thank you. Your Honor, I'm the prosecutor Victoria Lenkiewicz and the defendant, my friend Sheikal. Your Honor and member of the jury, this case is about the brutal behavior of Mr. Hammer towards Mr. Irwin during the game on Sunday, 1st December 2019. The defendant, Mr. Hammer, is charged with an offence to Section 47 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861, which states that the offence is committed when a person intentionally or recklessly assaults another, thereby causing actual bodily harm. During this case, it will be proven if the defendant has committed an act with intention or recklessness, so that Your Honor could decide whether he was guilty or not guilty of the offence. The facts of the case are that during the
Can I stop you there? Can you help me with this? Is it the Crown's view of that it's intention, or reckless, or both, or either of them?
Both or recklessness.
Oh, very well. Thank you.
So the facts of the case are that during the game on Sunday, 1st of December 2019, the defendant, Mr. Hammer, elbowed the complainant, Mr. Irwin, who after the match was taken to the hospital by ambulance with a broken cheekbone and concussion. The complainant has said that due to the hit, he was confused and couldn't remember much about the incident. He stated that he was so focused on the ball that he did not see Mr. Hammer approaching him. He indicated that he had never taken part in any violent incidents between the opposite teams. Nevertheless, he felt confused and agitated by the defendant's answer to one of his social media posts, which implied that his team should expect violence during the next match. Furthermore, one of the witnesses, Mr. Moore, is a referee who was present on the field and testified that the red card given to Mr. Hammer was the result of the intentional or reckless behavior of the defendant that he observed. He also stated that he was informed by the defendant's team's members that Mr. Hammer was looking at the complainant and seemed to target him. Mrs. Luke, who will be our second witness, had very similar feeling while watching the incident. She indicated that Mr. Hammer elbowed Mr. Irwin on purpose, which might have been the result of the tension between the opposite teams. The defendant claimed that the incident was an accident, and his team member, Mr. Irwin, who will be our last witness, supports him in the witness statement.
Can you just call witnesses rather than tell me what the witness is going to say?
Which witness?
Whatever witness you choose to call.
Christy Irwin.
Christy Irwin.
Because they might not say what you'll say.
Your opening statement.
Uh,
That
last part. On the behalf of prosecution, in my opinion, it is clear that defendant committed the assault occasioning actual bodily harm. And Your Honor, with the court permission, I would like to call the complainant Mrs.
Thank
Christy Irwin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could you confirm your full name and address, please?
Yeah, Mr. Christy Irwin, 28 Clarendon Court, PD8 8NF.
Would you kindly put the voice on?
Yes, sure.
If you could repeat after me. I, Christy Ivan,
I, Christy Irwin,
solemnly declare
solemnly declare
that what I'm about to say
that what I'm about to say
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
If it pleases you, Your Honor, the witness will take a seat and
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Irwin, what did you do in the evening on 1st December 2019?
I was at a football match.
Were you a player or were you a person watching the game?
No, I was playing.
What team did you play against then?
We played against the Valhalla team.
How does the atmosphere between the teams look like? Have you ever played any match before, the one on December?
Yes, we have played quite a few matches beforehand, and we've butted heads with the other team as well. There's been a few arrests, a few black eyes in our previous games.
So you say that the atmosphere between the teams wasn't the best, it was rather negative than the positive one.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Were you ever involved in any violent accident between the teams? Did you take part in, for example, in the fight in the changing room, the one
No.
after Regional Cup final?
No, I was not involved.
Did you have any personal issues with any of the players from that team or conflicts with them?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, thank you. What exactly happened during the match? Was there any incident that happened?
During the match, all I remember is aiming to head the ball in the other direction, and all of a sudden, all I remember is people crowded around me, bleeding with a concussion and a broken cheekbone.
I understand. Do you know who hit you?
Yeah, Thor hammer.
Have you seen him before jumping for the ball?
No, I was just more focused on the ball.
I understand. Did something unusual happen before or during the match, but before the incident between you and Mr. Hammer?
Yes, actually, me and Thor have quite a history. I have him on a few different social media accounts, Instagram and Facebook, and I commented on there a few days before the game about how they should say the prayers, because, you know, we as teams, we always have jokes between ourselves. However, Thor, I commented saying that he wants to beat us, and then he repeated his comment, but with capital letters. And to be honest, I was taken aback with that comment.
So how did you understand that comment?
That he physically wanted to harm either myself or another player.
Did you talk about it with other team members or with the coach, someone from the team?
I mentioned it to my friends whilst a few days ago when it was actually happening on
And
social media.
what was their opinion? Do you think they also reacted the way that he's
Yeah.
gonna...
They were quite shocked.
Okay, and thank you. Did you have any other contact with Mr. Hammer outside the matches, apart from the social media?
No.
Thank you. So that's all the questions from me. Thank you.
With the permission of the court, I would like to ask some questions to Mr. Irvine. Thank you. So, Mr. Irvine, before the match on the 1st of December, you said there was a bit of banter going into the game, is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. You instigated the social media banter, meaning you were the first to make a comment.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
You were met with a response by the defendant, Mr. Thor.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Before the game, did you mean your comments at all? Your comments in particular, did you mean them, or were they colloquial language?
No, they were just jokes.
There's exactly no intention behind them, right?
Yeah.
Correct, thank you. In your statement to the police, Mr. Irvine, you said that you only had your eyes to the ball during the collision, is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct. So you didn't see whether Mr. Thor was looking directly at you just before the collision?
That's correct.
Okay. So again, you don't know if Mr. Hamer deliberately assaulted you during the collision.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I will.
real quick?
So during the collision, you
Yeah.
cannot know if Mr. Thor Hamer deliberately elbowed you in the face.
I definitely think he deliberately did, only for the fact that I was aiming for that ball first, so he could clearly see me going for the ball first.
Didn't you just mention that you only had your eyes to the ball
Yes, that's
during
correct.
the collision? So how can you know if Mr. Thor Hamer was looking directly at you?
I can't recall.
No worries. One final question. Were there any other incidents during the game apart from that clash in the 52nd minute?
No.
So that was the only clash between the two of you.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you very much. That is the end of my cross-examination, Your Honour. Do you have any questions?
No.
I have no re-examination questions, thank you.
You may step down. Do you have another witness?
Yes, the prosecution calls Mr. Andy Moore as a witness.
If you remain standing for a minute, please confirm your name and address.
Andy Moore, flat 26 Pembroke Terrace, Bradford, BD7 1PY.
If you could repeat these words after me. I, Andy Moore,
I, Andy Moore,
solemnly declare
solemnly declare
that what I'm about to say
that what I'm about to say
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Right, you may take a seat.
Mr. Moore, do you recall what you have done on 1st of December 2019?
Yes, indeed. I'm a part-time football referee, and I was refereeing the match in the Midsummer Football League between Magmul FC and Valhalla AFC.
Could you tell us what are your responsibilities during the match? What do you do exactly?
Well, obviously I have to ensure that the rules of the game are followed and that any infringements of the laws of the game are dealt with and ensure that the game goes ahead as smoothly as possible.
So you're the person taking care of the safety at the football pitch where the player has to play safely and do not harm each other. Is that
Correct, yes, and to play according to the rules of the game, yes.
Thank you. Do you remember the incident that happened between Mr. Irwin and Mr. Hammer during that particular match?
Yes, I do. I tend to remember most of my sendings off, but it was a bit of a bad-tempered game, and it was in the 52nd minute that the Valhalla player, Thor Hammer, he and a player from the opposition, Christy, Irwin, both went up to head a ball and, in my opinion, using sort of excessive zeal and force, Mr. Hammer struck, when they went up to both head the ball with his elbow, it struck Mr. Irwin in the face, who then suffered serious injury and indeed was concussed.
Can you tell us how do normally players jump when there's a high ball? Do they usually put their arms up like Mr. Hammer did in this case?
Well, I mean, obviously, arms and legs in a football match do tend to flail around, but obviously players are supposed to play in accordance with the rules and be wary of the player's safety. And indeed, if there is excessive force or excessive zeal in a tackle or going for a ball, then that can, if it's too excessive, under Rule 12, excessive force is a serious offence that can be punished as a breach of the rules.
So, in your opinion, do you think that Mr. Hammer used too much force during that jump, and the elbow hit was too hard for another player?
I did indeed judge that a serious foul had been committed, and then I awarded a red card and sent Mr. Hammer off.
Can I ask how far were you from the incident? And
how far was I from the incident? I think it was about 15 yards from the incident itself. But obviously the players were up in the air and jumping, so I could see the incident.
So you saw the incident, but there were also other people between. So were there anyone that might have covered you the view?
Yes, my view was partially obscured. Indeed, I was told by some of the other players that Mr. Hammer had been looking in the direction of Mr. Irwin, but my view of that was obscured because he had his back to me. Yeah.
Can I ask which team members told you about
Which
that?
team members? It was actually other AC Valhalla players.
So the same team as Mr. Hammer.
Yes.
Thank you.
Your Honour, I would like to quickly object.
Yes.
That recent statement about other players talking to the referee about the foul, wouldn't you say that's hearsay?
What do you say?
I believe that that's a valid statement. As
Do you accept that it's hearsay or not?
excuse me.
Do you accept that that remark, that evidence is hearsay?
Yes.
Yes, it is, and it should be taken out of them.
Yes,
Shouldn't it? Yes.
I would say so.
So
yes.
it would be it's an inadmissible.
Exactly,
Yes,
yes.
thank you. Oh.
Then take it back. So can I ask Mr. Moore, how long are you the referee?
How long have I been a referee? Well, I've been doing it for some years, about 8 years.
Thank you. Can you tell us, like, how often do you have to give a red card for this kind of accidents, where the players between each other, one hit another, and there's a foul?
Yes. Well, it's not every match by any means. Probably in a season, depending on who's playing, probably about three
Okay,
to
so
5.
It's rather rare situation where players hit each other with such a big power that you would have to give them a red card and send them off.
Yes, because
Okay.
obviously that has a knock-on effect on them playing in other matches, and they are supposed to, abide by the laws of the game.
Thank you. In your statement, you mentioned that you gave Mr. Hammer a red card and sent him off for serious foul play. Could you explain what does it mean, and why did you exactly decide that the behavior was a serious foul play?
Well, because of the way in which the players had collided, I felt that in order to propel himself towards the ball, that Mr. Hammer, when he went up for the ball, went up with too much force, and that could endanger, the safety of another player, and therefore that's a breach of Law 12, which says using excessive force is when someone exceeds the necessary use of force and endangers the safety of an opponent.
Thank you. How did Mr. Hammer react after receiving a red card? Did he made any comment to you?
No, in fact, he accepted it really without complaint and left the field.
Thank you. So do you believe that giving him a red card was a good choice? Was it fair?
I believe so, yes. As I say, he didn't object, and that was my view, that excessive force was used.
Thank you. I would also want to ask, were you aware of the negative atmosphere between the teams?
Well, it was a bit of a bad-tempered game. I know there is a bit of history, but obviously you just take what happens on the day. So generally it was a bit bad-tempered, and there was a few niggles along the way. Yeah.
Were you aware of the violent incident between both teams that happened last time during their match in Regional Cup, where the players of both teams started a fight in a changing room, and then some of them were arrested, but no one was convicted of any offence? Were you aware of that fact?
No, not direct. I mean, obviously you hear things, and I knew there was some history, but the detail. You know, I'm a part-time referee because I'm a part-time musician as well. So I don't. You know, I try and keep on top of things, but it's not my full-time job. Yeah.
Yes, I understand. I'm asking because another question would be: do you think if the negative atmosphere between the teams might be the reason why Mr. Hammer would like to hurt Mr. Irwin during the game?
Yes, I mean there are often, you know, local derbies or teams that have like Manchester and Leeds or whatever, very strong competitive matches, more so than other matches. So I was aware of that. Yeah.
Thank you. No more questions for me.
Okay, with the permission of the court, I would like to cross-examine this witness. Mr. Moore, you are an amateur football referee, correct?
Indeed, yes.
Roughly speaking, how long have you been refereeing?
About eight years.
8 years, thank you. Have you officiated matches between fierce rivals before the 1st of December?
Well, yes, I've been around a few years, so I've had to referee some quite bad-tempered matches.
Thank you. Now, wouldn't you say these games by nature tend to be heated because of history, emotions and rivalry, correct?
Yes, I think so, yes.
These games tend to bring out the passionate side of footballers, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and indeed sometimes supporters, and yes.
Indeed, yes. Now, moving on. In your witness statement to the police, Mr. Moore, you said that you do not know whether Thor Hamer's conduct was intentional or accidental, correct?
Correct.
And also, as per your witness statement, you also said that your view of the collision was partially obscured, correct?
That's correct,
Yeah.
yes.
Do you mind if I ask, do you think Mr. Hamer's conduct was reckless by any chance?
Well, obviously, to give a red card and sending off and to judge him, in breach of Rule Law 12, yes, I mean, it's a serious foul and likely to endanger others.
So, in the context of the game of football, you would say it was reckless, correct?
Yes, in that it put others at risk.
Are you aware, generally speaking, of recklessness in a crime?
Well, yes, obviously, you hear about that being reckless, sort of, yes, not directly intending it, but that it could have that consequence, yeah.
Wouldn't you say recklessness in a crime slightly differs to recklessness in a football game, as per the rules of football?
Well, obviously, it's the laws of the game I know in detail, and I've not been to court before, so it's not really my area. But I guess, criminal actions you would, consider perhaps more serious than in a football match. But equally, there have been some instances where other, incidents have perhaps followed.
Understood. So I guess the reason why I asked that question was because I wanted to make a quick distinction between recklessness in terms of crime and recklessness in a game of football. But I will stick to football since that's your expertise. Now, you do not know whether Mr. Hamer was reckless in the context of football, or can you repeat, do you think he was reckless in the game of football?
Well, as I say, Law 12 talks about using excessive force that would endanger others.
Would you say that's reckless?
Well, I guess so, yes,
Yeah,
because if you're reckless, aren't you, then you can put others at risk, yes.
Got you. So, you think he was reckless as a statement of fact, despite having an unclear view of the actual collision?
Yes.
Okay. That would be all my questions, Your Honour. No further questions.
Your Honor, I would have a cross-examination, re-examination question to the witness. So, as the defendant asked about unclear view, and still you stated as a fact that the player behaved recklessly and the hit was reckless. Could you tell us if there were any other situations with other players in other teams that might have been similar, and your opinion, like, if you haven't seen the situation clearly, but your opinion was similar in that case, was there any other
Yes,
situation?
I think maybe I need to clarify that I felt I did see enough of the situation when they were going up for the ball to a judge that was a use of excessive force, but my view was then obscured in terms of who was looking at whom when they weren't up in the air. Yeah.
Okay, so you are saying that you saw clearly the way they jumped, or the second before the jump, but then the later part was obscured?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So by the moment when they were jumping, can you confirm that you saw whether Mr. Hammer was looking at the ball or at the player?
Well, I saw the incident, and I mentioned what people had told me about who was looking at whom, but Mr. Hammer's back was towards me, really, so I couldn't
See his face?
Yes.
Okay. No more further questions. Thank you, Your Honour.
I'm going to take my judge's wig off for a minute, because two things arose for an advocate, which you ought to think about and take it home if you want to do any advocacy. Victoria, you both did very well actually. You asked a question because it was only when you asked about him being obscured that came out. So when you think about it, it would have been best not to ask that question, wouldn't it? You with me?
Might be.
My point is, we all do it, and as I said, I'm very experienced. It's sometimes you ask the question and you just wish you hadn't, because it's the wrong answer, and I think maybe you did that.
Yes.
You, on the other hand, Sheikh, you asked about whether, I think in relation to Andy Moore, did he see? And he said, no, I didn't. I could see it in you. You wanted to develop that. But it's called cut and run. You've got your point, push off. Because, that's exactly what you did. Is everybody with me? I'm not being a judge now.
I understand. I do understand
Yes.
that, yeah.
It's the question you most want to ask, you know. I've seen it goes wrong so many times, but you cut and run with that. You got your point. That'll be in your speech, won't it, I hope? All right,
Yes.
let's crack on.
You got it.
My judge's wig is back on now.
Thank you.
The prosecution calls final witness Mrs. Kelly Luke.
If you could confirm your full name and address, please.
Yep, it's Kelly Luke from 21 Middlebrook Road, BD87PJ.
And if you could repeat these words after me. I, Kelly Luke,
I, Kelly Luke,
solemnly confirm
solemnly confirm
that what I'm about to say
that what I'm about to say
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you. You may be seated. Your witness.
Mrs. Luke, what were you doing in the evening on 1st of December 2019?
So the 1st of December 2019, I do remember recall it back, it being a Sunday. So on the afternoon and the evening, I was at a football match at Elysian Football Stadium. I went to watch my husband play, Freddie Luke, and that's where I was that evening.
Thank you. Do you personally know the defendant, Mr. Hammer, or the complainant, Mr. Irwin?
I don't personally know the defendant. The complainant is my husband's friend because they play football together. So that's how I know him through him, but I wouldn't say I have any personal relationships with him.
Thank you. Can you tell us, what did you observe during the match? Was there any incident that happened?
So after half time of the game, I witnessed Chris was elbowed in the face, Christy was elbowed in the face by Thor Hammer. It was just thinking back at it, it was quite something that I wouldn't like to witness again. It looks like it was something that was actually meant and done on purpose.
Can you describe it a little bit more? How did it happen? What did you see exactly?
Yep, so it was at the point of when the ball was up in the air. They both aimed for a header, but I do know that Christy was aiming for the ball first, and then Thor saw that he was actually had direct eye contact with the ball, aiming to actually go and head the ball. And that's
Could you take your evidence a bit slowly? I'm writing this down, so could you
yeah,
go a bit slower?
sure, that's fine. So he had kind of jumped up to head the ball, and that's when Christy had actually jumped up at the time to head the ball, and that's when Thor Hammer had sprinted up, and as he jumped, he had elbowed Christy in the face.
Thank you. So from your perspective, you saw that Mr. Irwin, he was already jumping, focused on the ball,
Yeah.
while Mr. Hammer was jumping after seeing the complainant in the air.
Yeah, he definitely did jump after seeing him in the air and seeing that he was focused, aiming for that header to potentially score that goal.
Thank you. In your statement, you mentioned also now that it looked like Mr. Hammer meant to elbow and hurt Mr. Ivan.
Yeah.
Why do you think so?
It was quite a rough game, and I know that there was tensions that were building up over a couple of weeks prior to the game. There was incidents of insults from him on social media to Christy. I mean, I personally am not a social media person, but from what my husband was telling me, Freddie Luke, there was a few things that were said online, and he did have I'd say that he had the intention of beating the boys up from my husband's team.
I understand. Do you know how did the atmosphere between the team look like? I understand you might follow most of the matches of your husband, so did you notice something unusual between the teams
Yeah,
earlier?
it looked like quite a fractious atmosphere where I'd say it was quite like a rough game.
Thank you. Were you aware of the fight between the teams after last match, the regional cup in the regional cup final?
Yeah, so there was something that my husband actually mentioned to me. So there was a previous game where they were both in the cup final, and there was something between the players that neither my husband nor Christy or Thor was actually involved in. But there was something where they actually got quite physical, and there were a couple of arrests, but I don't know much details about that.
Thank you. In your statement, you said that you were the person who called the police. Why did you do that?
Yeah, so I called the police because I had enough of the violence. It was quite, he was quite badly injured, was Christy. He was elbowed in the face with a broken cheekbone, which we heard and witnessed, and then the concussion too. So it was just something that I wouldn't put up with, and I was just scared, and I'd fear that my husband would go through something similar to that. So that's the reason I called the police.
Thank you. Do you believe that this kind of behavior was something unusual? Because, of course, like during the sports, injuries happen. Members of each team can accidentally hit someone from the opposite team. Do you think that this kind of accident was intentional or reckless? Do you think that, yes, that the defendant did it on purpose?
Yeah, so I do know injuries do happen from a game, and there's many players that are taken off the game due to injuries, but just from watching this game, I could tell that it was meant and it was purposely done, knowing what had happened on social media prior to that as well. So I do think that it was definitely intentional and it was reckless behaviour. He got a red card from the referee, which I think he fully deserved.
Thank you. Those are all the questions from me.
Permission to cross-examine you.
Yeah.
Okay, Mrs. Luke, how far away were you from the collision in 52nd minute?
So I was about 20 yards from the incident when it occurred, yeah.
Got it. I'd say that's a fair distance from the actual collision, but moving on, Mrs. Kelly, you read the social media comments before the game, right?
I hadn't read them myself, but my husband did make me aware of them, yes.
So you are aware of the comments
Yeah.
made. Are you aware of the comments made by Christy by any chance?
I was briefly told.
After reading those comments, you inferred in your witness statement that Thor Hamer wanted to beat up our boys.
Yeah.
This is a reference to the Magmal FC players, correct?
Yeah.
Right. Are you certain that Mr. Hamer meant that with his comments?
Yep, he had actually reiterated it where he had put, from what I had heard from my husband and what from my husband had told me, he had actually put that about the beating, and then he had reiterated that point and he had put it in capitals from how it came across online.
Okay.
So it was something that was meant quite physically, and then that is something that actually happened on the day of the game.
Understood. So you also mentioned you were expecting trouble before the game, correct?
Myself, I guess from the comments online,
Yeah.
yes, but I think the team as a whole were expecting trouble from that game.
That's okay. That's okay. And in your witness statement, you mentioned you were expecting trouble because of Mr. Hamer's comments, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Mrs. Kelly, I will quickly quote to you the comment made by Christy, and I will follow that up with a question. So Mr. Christy before the game said, Valhalla need to pray for a miracle that they come out of this game alive. Now my question to you is, could Thor Hamer and the rest of his teammates have also expected trouble before the game because of Christy's comments?
Right. With that comment online, potentially they could have, but I couldn't know what he meant by that.
That's fine, no worries. One final question then. You said in your testimony that the red card was fully deserved. Do you have knowledge about the FA rules of the game by any chance, for you to say that it was fully deserved?
To be honest, I don't actually know the rules of football exactly, although my husband plays in the team. I barely go to watch a football match, it's only I went to support my husband, but I do think from watching the match and the injuries and the way they came across, the way the two teams were, I do think he deserved that red card and to be sent off.
And just to finally confirm, you say that Thor Hamer and the rest of his team could have inferred violence before the game because of Christy's comments, right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. No further questions, Your Honour.
Your examination.
Your Honor, no further questions from the prosecutions. Thank you.
Is that the close of the prosecution case?
This is the case on behalf of the
Thank you
prosecution,
very much.
Honor.
Thank you.
Your Honour, members of the jury, my name is Sheikh Amin and I appear on behalf of the defendant, Mr. Thor Hamer. Today I will be challenging the prosecution on the elements of mens rea for a Section 47 offence against the person.
You're calling witnesses for that.
Sorry?
You're calling witnesses, aren't you?
This is my opening statement very quickly.
You're making an opening statement?
Yes.
Right.
Thank you. As I was mentioning, today I will be challenging the prosecution on the elements of mens rea for the Section 47 offence against the person. You will hear from witness testimonies that the defendant committed no intentional act, nor was he reckless in his conduct. To the contrary, you may hear from the testimonies of the witnesses that the incident on the 1st of December was merely an accident. Also, Your Honour, I will be discussing the defence of consent for lawful sport in support of my submissions on behalf of the defendant. And if it pleases the court, I would like to bring the defendant, Mr. Thor Hamer, to the stand.
Thank you.
If you could once again confirm your full name and address, please.
My name is Thor Hamer. My address is 23 Coronation Road, Bradford, BD7, 4DL.
Thank you. And if you could please repeat these words after me. I, Thor Hamer,
I, Thor Hamer,
solemnly confirm
solemnly confirm
that what I'm about to say
that what I'm about to say
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
may take a seat.
Thank you.
Your Honour, with your permission, I would like to examine the defendant.
Yes.
Mr. Hamer, do you take part in Sunday League football?
Yes, I do.
You do. Roughly speaking, how long have you played amateur football?
Well, I have been in and out for a number of years, probably 6-7 years, maybe.
6-7
But it has been for some time.
During the game on the 1st of December, there was a collision between yourself and the complainant Christy Irwin at the 52nd minute of the game, for which there is now a trial. Could you please explain to the court what happened in that 52nd minute from your perspective?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I would like to say I'm very surprised that I'm stand accused of having committed a criminal offence for something that has been regularly happening in football matches. So on that minute of the game, me and my opponent both went for the ball, trying to get that header, and we're very close to each other. And obviously, I tried to jump, obviously to go first for the header. I lifted my elbow, which is naturally part of that process. You know, you're going to jump, you get the maximum height, you lift your elbows, and of course, in that process, I hit accidentally my opponent in the face. They were very close to me anyway, so it's pretty much as was trying to lift my head, my elbow. I mean, I would inevitably hit him. It's very unfortunate, of course, that this resulted in the serious injury, but there was no intention whatsoever. What I was trying to do is just go for the ball first and get that header.
Thank you, Mr. Hamer. With all that said, do you think that that challenge was a fair challenge then?
Yeah, I believe so. There are those things that have been happening. They were both going for the same header, so yeah, I think it was.
Did you intend to elbow Christy in the face during the game?
No, because everything happened, let's say, momentarily. So I lifted my elbow, was going for that header, and as I said, he was next to me. There's no time to think or start planning something in advance or trying to hit someone. It just happens, you know, as you are aiming for the same ball.
Yes. Did you intend to injure Christy?
Of course not. There's no way I would do it, and I had no reason to do so.
In your witness statement, Mr. Hamer, you explained that you naturally raise your elbows into the air to gain height in an aerial duel. Can you just elaborate on this a little bit further for the court?
Yeah. You mean to show you how it happens?
Yes.
Well, I mean, the ball was coming our way, so we both headed in that direction. And obviously, we had to get that header. So in that case, we both jump, me and my opponent. Apparently, I jumped higher than he did. That's why I was able with my elbow to hit the face, and hit him in the face. And also because it happens for me to be a bit taller, so naturally my elbow, I was able to lift it higher than him. So it came, again, as I said, it was possible to hit him in the face. So, and, especially as you are headed towards the ball, and sometimes you lift your elbows, you put them that way, somehow, push backwards a little bit. That's where his face came in, so I was able to hit him there. As I said, it's some of those kinds of incidents that happen in every game. Just unfortunate that I have also been on the other side of this kind of engagement, and I've been hit occasionally on the face, but obviously without serious incidents. So it could happen once in a while, some injury to happen, but there was nothing unusual in this encounter.
Yes. Okay. After seeing the complainant Christy in pain, what did the referee do? Can you recall?
Well, of course, they invited the medics to help the victim because it was clear that he suffered some injury. Then they turned to me. He turned to me and he sent me off the game with a red card. I told him that it was not intentional, but he said it was very reckless, so he thought it was a fair punishment for me, which I am happy to accept. I mean, it was like a harsh encounter, so he would justify to send me off. But I say again, it was nothing though, even close to a criminal offence situation.
Got you. You mentioned you were sent off. Did you contest that red card at all?
Well, I told him it was unintentional. It was not my intention, but he said I was reckless.
Okay.
So he thought that was the right decision to make.
In your witness statement, you said that you did something after accepting the red card. Can you recall what you did?
I'm not sure.
I'll refresh your memory. You mentioned that you called the ambulance for Christy. Is this correct?
I called the ambulance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I felt, first of all, you know, in the first moments of the injury, you're not sure how serious that would be. When it seemed to be quite serious, let's say, and I thought that my colleague needed more attention, so yes, I called for the ambulance.
Thank you very much. Guess that would be all. That would be the end of my chief examination, Your Honour. Do you have any questions?
No.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I would like to ask the witness some questions. Mr. Hammer, you are the amateur player in AFC Valhalla, is that correct?
That's correct.
How long do you play in the club?
For 6 years?
That's quite a long time, so you should be aware of the regulations and rules of the game. Shouldn't
Yes,
you?
I do so. Though I have to stress that I'm an amateur player, so I'm not a professional.
Yeah,
So we do it as a hobby. So we know the rules, of course, yes.
but are you aware of the rule that you cannot hit other players, for
Yeah,
example?
of course. But in a real game, obviously, some collisions can happen, you know, by accident, or we will both aim for the ball. So it could happen, some collisions.
I believe that as a part of a team, you were aware of the negative atmosphere between your team and Manuel FC. Is
Yes,
that correct?
yes. I mean, it has a long history as well, by the way.
Have you taken part in any violent incidents between the players?
Not myself or my opponent, but there was that incident last year after the cup final, where there was some between some falling out, let's say, where the police was involved, but I was not part of that incident.
Thank you. So, do you remember the incident between you and Mr. Irwin? And could you tell us again what happened?
During the game?
Yes, the moment when you were both jumping for the ball.
Yes, so we're both aiming for a ball, and as I said, because we're jumping, ball jumped, we both use our elbows actually, but that was because I was a bit taller, I was able to aim higher, I was able to, it happened to hit him on in the face with the back of my elbow.
Earlier you mentioned that you both jumped at the same time, but the witnesses, both from your team, the referee, and the members from the opposite team, said that you jumped as a second and you were looking at the complainant. Which one is correct then?
First of all, this is a momentary. What happened was happened momentarily. This means we're talking about not even 1 second. We're talking about a fraction of a second. So the way I saw it, because I saw him going for the ball as well, so I went with him. In my view, we're at the same time, unless you think that like a fraction of a second or something difference can make any big difference. In my view, we're at the same time.
I understand. As I mentioned, a lot of witnesses stated that your action was intentional. How would you comment that?
The only intention there was that we were both going for the ball. So that was our intention, to get the header first. So that intention was true. But intention to hit another player and send them to the hospital with serious injury, no.
Do you believe that you could have avoided the hitting of the player from the opposite team?
No, because the actual jump, if everybody was trying to do it to see how it actually happened, as I said, instantly. You have no time to think or plan this kind of injury. Because when it's intentional, sometimes you have some time to think about it, you know, and think, okay, I have a chance to hit him, let's do it. But you don't have the time for this type of jump. So, no intention.
But don't you think then that your action might be seen as reckless then?
Well, I mean, I was sent off with a red card. So this means that the referee thought I was reckless. So I contest that, of course, but that's part of the game. That's why we have red cards. You know, players are sent off the games quite often. So there's nothing unusual. I mean, there was obviously also, there was a lot of, if I want to say, excitement and some bad tempers before the game. So both teams wanted the victory, want to win. But obviously, there was nothing unusual in my case. So it was something that could happen. The referee, as far as I heard earlier on, they said there was excessive use of force, which again, can happen, so I don't contest that. That's why injuries are happening. But I contest there was any criminal intent behind this behavior.
Relating to that comment, I would like to notice that in your previous statement, you also mentioned that professional players get away with much worse than what happened between you and the complainant. Is that correct?
Yes, of course. There are, serious injuries of players who are, much more serious than concussions. So they're life-threatening situations. So there are. And they're getting away with it in terms of, well, if we had to bring all these cases to criminal courts, I think criminal courts would be very busy indeed. I don't think that that's something that we would expect to see.
I understand, but my question is, don't you think that if you're playing in an amateur league, the game is supposed to be less brutal and more, let's say, family-friendly, where any kind of unusual aggressive behavior should be punished with red card or sending off to the bench?
No, because sending off to the bench amateurs who are just trying to win a game, I think there's also even less motivation comparing to professionals, because professionals want to win because it means money for them. So sometimes might be more likely to be intentional, their actions. We as amateurs, or our intention is to play for the, we don't play for money, we're not going to be paid more if we win or anything. So that's also an argument against intent. So we don't have any intent to injure someone else for something that does not bring us any personal benefit, apart of course from the pleasure, happiness of winning the game. So yeah, that's what I believe.
So if you said that you're not getting paid for the game, it's mostly for the fun, don't you think that your decision to run and jump to the high ball at the same time with Mr. Irwin might have been also dangerous for you?
Yeah, it could have been. I mean, when you play a game, injuries can happen. I had been injured before, not seriously, of course, taken to the hospital, but I had been injured. Injuries can happen when you play football. So I think, and of course, I could have been on the other side, on the receiving side of the injury. So it's sometimes risk you have to take, but obviously you always hope that serious injuries would not happen. So get cuts, for instance, on the brow sometimes. So it could happen. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to ask, have you ever had contact with the complainant outside the matches, in private life, not
you mean on the social
games?
media only? You had that?
Social media, for example, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we had an exchange during the previous, not personal exchange, so I just joked in the social media, because there were all these exchanges, that happened sometimes before the matches, between fans and people involved, and I did write jokingly that we're going to beat them. So that's what happened, and of course that it's part of the exchanges you normally have before a game, just to create some more excitement before the game, and obviously help prepare for it better. Increase our motivation, if you want.
Did you expect at any time that this kind of comment might worry the opposite team, that you are actually going to beat them or hurt any of the opposite team players? No,
because they have been using similar terms as well from their side, like we have to say our prayers, things like that. But again, they do happen, as I said before. I wouldn't take that seriously, even if it was coming from the other side saying we're going to beat us. Yeah, okay, let them beat us.
Yes. Can I confirm that you are a school teacher? Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you not expect that this kind of comment might have been found aggressive online? I understand you deal with the young teenagers or children every day at school, and you probably teach them not to write this kind of comments on social media or think about the second meaning of everything they're writing.
Well, these are statements you normally see in football and in most sports before games, saying we're going to beat you, team players exchanging those, fans exchanging those. I think even, school children also are kind of familiar with this kind of terminology. I mean, I don't think we would expect a war coming out of this statement. So I believe that, no, I don't see any incompatibility between my job and my duties to children and that statement.
I would like to ask then, because you said that it happens before many matches between different teams, but your team and team where Mr. Irwin plays has slightly different history when there were actually incidents where there was a fight between the team members, but you still decided to post this kind of comment. Didn't it change anything like?
Well, I mean, first of all, because exactly of the history, both teams wanted to win. Okay, so they were more motivated than normal to win that game, that match. So, and that applies also from their side. And if you would watch that game, you would see also they were aiming. They were very passionate during the game. So, and of course, some will describe it as bad-tempered game. I would describe it as very passionate from both sides. So there have been also, obviously, quite a lot of collisions during the game. So nothing, in my view, again, there was more, but we're within, what we have seen also in the previous games between us. So that kind of statement on the media, I wouldn't expect it to make any difference in terms of, apart from, of course, because as I said earlier on, there were also statements from their side. So just see it as a part of demonstrating our strong, let's say, strong intention to win that game, that we're going to beat them, we're going to win the game. That's what we're aiming for. So people, of course, someone might see it differently, but I don't think, if you're part of all of this, and they're players, I don't think they saw it in a different way, regardless of what, of course, the victim says now. But I didn't see any unusual reaction back then.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you.
Permission to re-examine, Your Honor. I have a couple of questions, generally speaking. So first, I think you've alluded to this earlier, but how would you describe the rivalry between AFC Valhalla and Magmel FC?
Well, it's a rivalry that I have seen also. It happens sometimes between football clubs and their fans. So it's not something unique in the football area. So it's something that's been happening. To me, sometimes, of course, should not result in violence like the one I've seen in the previous, after the Cup final last year. So I'm not condoning violence by any means. I'm a teacher. So I have no intention even of provoking that violence myself. And so I would say that it's something that is happening. But I think in some cases the two teams, the whole atmosphere was maybe a little bit more, let's say, bad-tempered than you would want to see. But it's not unusual.
Understood. Final question. I think you also mentioned this earlier. Were you keen to win the game against Magmel FC?
Yes.
Yes, you were.
That's why we're playing the game for.
Yes, understood. No further questions, Your Honour. Do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. You may take a seat. And with the permission of the court, I would like to bring out the final witness on behalf of the defence, Mr. Anthony Ironman.
Could you confirm your full name and address to the court, please?
Yeah, it's Anthony Ironman from Richmond Road in Bradford, BD14DJ.
And if you could repeat these words after me. I, Anthony Ironman,
I, Anthony Ironman,
do solemnly declare
do solemnly declare
that what I'm about to say
that what I am about to say
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
You may take a seat. Thank you.
Mr. Ironman, do you play Sunday League football?
I do.
You do. Roughly how long have you played amateur football?
Oh, since I was about 6. Yeah, almost
Yes.
every Sunday since I was a little boy.
Yeah. Could I ask, Mr. Ironman, did you see the incident between Mr. Hamer and Mr. Irvine in the 52nd minute of the
Yeah.
game?
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah.
Did you have a clear vision of that incident?
Yeah.
You did. Could you please explain to the court what exactly you saw?
Yeah, I saw everything because, the ball was there, so I was watching the ball. He went up for it, and the bloke's face collided with his elbow. What can you do?
Cool. Do you think Mr. Thor Hamer intended to elbow Christy?
No.
You don't. Do you think it was an accident?
It was just part of the game, yeah, it's an accident, yeah.
Accident. Could you explain why you think it's an accident?
I mean, it happens all the time.
Mm.
You know, it's like in games of football, the ball's there, you try and win it. Yeah, it's just, yeah, he didn't intend to do it. He's got a heart of gold.
Thank you,
School
Mr.
teacher,
Ironman.
primary school teacher. Why would he wreck all that just for a game of football?
Thank you. Mr. Hamer, the defendant, made a statement to the police saying that you naturally raise your elbows in the air to gain height, presumably in an aerial duel. Do you agree with this statement, since you're a footballer?
Yeah, that's what I saw. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, his elbows were up there like that. The guy, and he's taller than him. So yeah, he rose above him, and his elbow was at his face height. And yeah, when you jump, you naturally do that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Thank you. In your witness statement, Mr. Ironman, you say that these sort of things happen all the time. What exactly were you referring to when you said that in your statement?
Watch any game of football. I mean, you'll see accidents. You'll see some players stamping on a guy. Never ends up in court, does it? You know,
Thank
what
you.
we doing? What are we doing here? So yeah, no, yeah, I don't know why it should come down on Thor like this.
Got you. In your witness statement, you also mentioned, I think you also mentioned in your testimony already, that Thor Hamer is not a violent man. Why do you say this?
Yeah, I've known him for years. He's a lovely bloke. Yeah, school teacher, never had any trouble. Yeah, I mean, he's the one calming things down on the pitch sometimes when other lads. Yeah, I'd expect it from other lads, but not Thor.
Thank you. I would also like to take this time to quickly apologise for an earlier blunder I made. When I questioned Mr. Thor Hamer, I said that in his statement that he called the ambulance, when it was in fact in the statement of Mr. Ironman who said that it was Thor Hamer who called the ambulance.
You should be apologising to me, not to him.
Yeah, I did apologise to you.
You meant to me, yeah.
Yeah,
Very well.
thank you. So just to reiterate in your statement, who called the ambulance for Christy when he was
Oh
injured?
yeah, he did.
He was Thor
Yeah,
Hamer,
yeah,
wasn't
Thor. Yeah, Thor did it.
Thank you very much. No further questions. That is the end of my chief examination, Your Honour.
Your Honor, I would like to ask the witness some questions. Mr. Ironman, you agree that you took part in the match on Sunday, 1st of December 2019.
Yep.
You play for AFC Valgala together with Mr. Hammer, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
How long do you know Mr. Hammer?
Oh, is it now? He's been playing for the club 6 years. Yeah, I was there before him, so let's say 6 years. Yeah.
Can you say that you're close friends with Mr. Hammer?
Yeah, well, yeah, as far as it goes. I mean, we live different lives, we walk different paths. But yeah, on the weekend, teammates, 6 years now, so yeah.
That's a long time,
Mm-hmm.
so I believe your relation is quite close as the team members. You stated that you saw the incident very clearly. Could you tell us how far you were from the Mr.
Okay,
Hammer?
yeah. Oh, that was in about the centre of the park. I was playing defence, so about 20 yards.
Was there anyone between Mr. Irwin and Mr. Hammer and you? Or was it very clear shot and you saw everything?
No, I saw it clearly. There was no one blocking my view.
Don't you think that it's quite far distance to say what exactly happened, or where was Mr. Hammer looking, or?
I'd say that's true of everyone on the pitch, and even the referee. I mean, I know what I saw, and knowing him, yeah, I'd be very surprised if he did it on purpose. But you know, he went up for the ball. That's all I saw. He went up to head the ball, and the other guy collapsed in a heap.
I understand. From your perspective, do you think Mr. Irwin or Mr. Hammer jumped first?
Probably both jumped at the same time.
Thank you. Other witnesses, including the members of your team, stated that Mr. Hammer's behavior was intentional during the jump. Why would you say otherwise?
Well, he intended to win the ball, but whether he intended to smack him in the face, yeah, I'd disagree with that. Yeah, his intentions were to head the ball away.
Thank you.
I don't know, what do you mean by?
If the intention of hitting the
Yeah.
complainant was,
No.
if there was intention.
No, he's got a heart of gold, no. No, he's too smart to jeopardise everything just for.
But
Just
you
for-
know that, are you aware of the comment that Mr. Hammer posted under the post on social media?
Yeah, there was some chat about that. Yeah, it's just banter, isn't it? It's football. It's just I
Well-
don't think you should read anything into that.
I would like to remind you that the comment was, I would love it if we beat them on Sunday, and I mean beat them in capital letters. Don't you think that this kind of comment might, in a way, say that Mr. Hammer would like to hurt one of the players during the game?
No, football's full of that. If you go to a football game and hear the chants that they come out with, nobody means it. It's just I don't know. Personally, it's rivals. We're big rivals with Valhalla, but it's Sunday League. You know, it's not that important. So personally, I wouldn't read anything into that myself. We want to beat them. Of course, we wanted to beat them.
Thank you. You mentioned that you don't think that Mr. Hammer's behavior was intentional, but do you think it might be reckless?
What do you mean? Sorry.
It would mean that he did not think about the jump, or he didn't imagine that he might have hurt someone else.
In fairness, the witness can't say what was going on in Mr. Hamer's mind, can he?
Yes, but I just wanted to ask from his perspective, how did it look like? Because many witnesses noticed that Mr. Hammers was looking directly at the complainant, not at the ball, which in a way would show that he was aware of a second player and might have stopped before jumping into him.
I mean, if you're talking about the risk, I mean, don't we take risks? You know, stepping out onto the football pitch. We know that we could go home with a broken leg. We know that anything could happen. The crossbar could fall on your head and knock you out. There's risks in the game of football, and you take them. You appreciate them and you take them. Was it unreasonable for him to do that? I suppose. No, I don't think so. No, the ball was up there. It was fair. They contested a header. He won the header. The other guy collapsed in a heap. It's very sad, but it's gone too far.
Thank you. I have no questions,
Thank
Your
you.
Honour.
No further re-examination, Your Honour, and that is the case on behalf of the defence. The defence will now rest.
Thank you. Well, members of the jury, it falls now to me to address you, to explain my role as judge and your role. And I'm going to start by saying I am the final arbiter.
Apologies for interrupting. I don't know that the prosecution and defence had any closing speeches. Apologies for interrupting,
Very well.
Your Honour.
Yes,
Did you
you
have
do
any
quite right.
closing speeches? Apologies for that.
Prosecution.
Yes, we'll start with your closing speech, please.
Your Honour and members of the jury, you have now heard all of the evidence in this case, of which I would like to take the opportunity to remind you. The defendant, Mr. Hammer, is accused of assault occasioning actual bodily harm contrary to Section 47 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861. The prosecution case is that the defendant elbowed the complainant during the game on Sunday, 1st of December 2019, causing broken cheekbone and concussion. The complainant, Mr. Irwin, stated that he does not remember much from the incident as he was concussed, but at the same time he was very surprised after being hit by the defendant, Mr. Hammer. He was still happy to play after reading an aggressive comment of the defendant on social media and the awareness of the violent incident between the teams during last match. The first witness, Mr. Moore, stated that he found the defendant's behavior intentional and reckless and was considered a serious foul play in line with Law 12 Fouls and Misconduct, which states that using excessive force is when a player exceeds the necessary use of force and endangers the safety of the opponent and must be sent off. Despite of the distance and partially obscured view, the witness was assured by the defendant's team members that his behavior looked intentional. I want to emphasize that the defendant's team did not have any benefits from confirming the assumption about the intention to hit Mr. Irwin. The second witness, Mrs. Luke, had a clear view of the situation, knew the atmosphere between the teams, and stated that in her eyes, the accident was clearly intentional. She was also a person who called the police as she was afraid that the violence between the teams will arise. On the other hand, the defendant, Mr. Hammer, had claims that the incident was an accident and had nothing to do with the atmosphere between the teams or his ambiguous comment under Mr. Irwin's post on social media. He accepted the red flag and being banned from the games for a few next weeks, but does not agree with the accusation. On his side, there's also his team member, Mr. Ironman, who was the last witness today. He claimed that the incident was an accident, and he cannot imagine Mr. Hammer, who is a primary school teacher, to intentionally hit someone during the Sunday league game. Participation in a sport such as football gives rise to implicit consent to a risk of injury and even actual bodily harm. Nevertheless, in order to prevent that, most sports have their disciplinary procedures and rules. The court needs only intervene when the conduct that has occurred is extreme or serious, which I believe our case was. The incident did not end up in bruises or red skin, but complainant's broken cheekbone and concussion. It is crucial to look at Mr. Hammer's action through some factors that might help in deciding whether the action was an offense. First of all, it is important to state the type and level at which the sport was participated in. In this case, we are talking about amateur football, which in my eyes should be a friendly and not aggressive sport. We have to also look at the degree of force used. During the football game, there should not be any or very limited physical contact between the opposite team members. Nevertheless, in this case, a contact occurred and caused the complainant broken cheekbone and concussion. I want to emphasize that in sports such as boxing or MMA, where hitting the opponent is the main goal of the sport, fractures of the facial bones are rare despite of the force used by the opponent. Now please imagine how much power the defendant had to use during the amateur football match to cause this kind of injury on the complainant. Another important aspect is the state of the defendant's mind. According to Mr. Hammer, the incident was an accident and he did not plan to hit the complainant. Nevertheless, he did not take due care to avoid the resulting collision and complainant's harm. In addition, his comment on social media before the match suggested an aggressive attitude towards the opposite team. The prosecution is aware that Mr. Irwin agreed to potential risk of injury while starting to play in the game. Nonetheless, Mr. Hammer's behavior exceeded the potential injuries anticipated by the game regulations, which was confirmed by the first witness, Mr. Moore. The similar situation happened in two cases, Billinghurst 1978 and Burns 2004. In both situations, the defendant has injured the body of an opposite team player, and injury was serious enough to charge the defendant with inflicting grievous bodily harm, contrary to Section 20 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861. In our case, defendant is accused of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, contrary to Section 47 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861. Nevertheless, both examples showed that there should be a clear line between the act that can be punished by only receiving a red card for a foul and actual offense punished by the law. In order to consider offense the assault occasioning actual bodily harm, it must be proven that the assault caused bodily harm. In this case, we have the medical opinion that the complainant's cheekbone was broken and he experienced concussion. It is also confirmed, the rule mentioned in Donovan 1934 case, that the hurt need to be permanent. It does not need to be permanent, but must be more than transient and trifling. Your Honor and members of the jury, the burden of proof lies with the prosecution. If they have convinced you such that you are sure that the defendant is guilty, then you must convict. However, if there's any doubt in your mind as to whether the defendant committed this act, after hearing the evidence in court today, you must find him not guilty. Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, members of the jury, On behalf of the defendant, Mr. Hamer, I would like to make the following submissions. Firstly, there is no dispute against the actus reus for an assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and the defendant, Mr. Hamer, does not deny the plight or the severity of the injury caused to the complainant, Mr. Christy Irvine. However, the defence today challenges the evidence presented regarding the mens rea required to prove an offence against the person contrary to Section 47 of the Offences Against Persons Act 1861. As pointed out by my learned colleague, or rather she alluded to, the mens rea of a Section 47 offence contains two categories, namely intentional conduct or two reckless conduct. So the first issue is whether Mr. Hamer intentionally maimed the complainant in question. There are witness statements from both the defence and the prosecution that oppose this notion. For example, in the testimony of the referee Andy Moore, who is the most neutral witness in this trial, he points out that he does not know whether the conduct of Thor Hamer during the game was intentional or accidental. Mr. Anthony Ironman, who appeared on behalf of the defence, asserted under oath that he saw the incident clearly and the aerial collision was a sort of accident that happens all the time. Luke Kelly, who appeared on behalf of the prosecution, mentioned in her statement to the police that she was about 20 yards away from the incident and that it merely looked like Thor Hamer was targeting Christy before the collision. 20 yards is a fair distance away from the collision, thus I respectfully submit to the court that Kelly's statements are not reliable enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Thor Hamer intended to elbow the complainant during the match. Christy Irvine, the complainant, mentions in his testimony that he only had eyes to the ball during the collision. Therefore, he is also unable to prove that Thor intended to elbow him during the actual collision. And finally, the defendant himself testified under oath that he did not intend to elbow the complainant or cause bodily injury, rather this was a simple accident. In addressing the social media comment released by the defendant, I respectfully submit to the court that Thor did not literally mean to beat or physically assault the Magmel players with that comment. Rather, his comment displayed a keen desire to beat Magmel FC in a game of football, a sort of derby, especially considering the emotional history attached to such a fixture. Reading Thor Hamer's comments in isolation does not prove criminal intention beyond a reasonable doubt. There may have been a double play on words with the term beat, but again, it does not prove criminal intention beyond a reasonable doubt in my respectful submission. Now, the second issue is whether Mr. Hamer recklessly battered the complainant, causing him bodily injury. The basic principle for recklessness concerns the existence of a risk, the defendant being aware of the risk, and whether the defendant then consciously takes that risk. Thor Hamer indeed took a risk, as did the complainant Christy Irvine, by challenging in an aerial battle for the ball that was in the air. Unfortunately, Christy Irvine did come off worse in that particular duel. Another basic element to establish recklessness is a test for reasonableness. In other words, was Thor Hamer's decision to take a risk in an aerial battle unreasonable in the eyes of the law or unreasonable in the eyes of the public? If the answer to that question is no, then I respectfully submit to the court that the defendant did not act recklessly either. To the contrary, it is quite normal for a player to take a risk and challenge for a header in that situation. And raising the elbow was simply to gain height, as testified by the defendant. Another point I would like to submit before the court are the potential defences in this case, namely consent in properly conducted sports and the defence of legitimate sport. For the defence of consent, I would like to quote to you Lord Wolfe, Chief Justice in R.V. Barnes 2004. In paragraph 13, he says...
I am aware of the law in relation to this matter, yes.
Okay. Would it be okay if I point out the specific element of this particular quote?
If you must, but I'm, as I say,
Okay.
I'm familiar with the...
No worries. Just for the members of the jury to understand for this particular case. In a sport in which bodily contact is a commonplace part of the game, the players consent to such contact, even if unfortunate accident or injury, perhaps of a serious nature, may result. However, players do not consent to being deliberately assaulted. This rule illustrates the implicit consent to common assaults in contact sports such as football. And as I respectfully submitted earlier, Thor Hamer did not deliberately batter the complainant. Therefore, it can be strongly argued that consent may be used as a defence to also prevent Mr. Hamer from being convicted of a Section 47 offence against the person. When it comes to the defence of legitimate sport, it comes down to one question: what is accepted in a game of football? Again, to quote Lord Wolfe, Chief Justice in R.V. Barnes, in paragraph 15 he mentions, in highly competitive sports, conduct outside the rules can be expected to occur in the heat of the moment. And even if the conduct justifies not only being penalised, but also a warning or even a sending off, it still may not reach the threshold level required for it to be regarded criminal. So what we learn from this is that the conduct outside the rules of the game may not be a crime, on the condition that the conduct was not intentional or subjectively reckless. So with reference to the principles in R.V. Barnes, I respectfully submit to the court that the defendant, Thor Hamer, should not be criminalised for an accidental collision, even if the conduct can be deemed outside the rules of the sport. To conclude on my summary, I would like to finally point out the members of the jury should pay due regard to all of the circumstances pertaining to the incident, as will be explained by His Honour. For example, the fact that it was a highly competitive game, the fact that it's a heated match between fierce rivals, the fact that the players are not professional footballers, thus the standards of performance may be lower. These are very important circumstances to consider before reaching a final verdict, and with that, Your Honour, that is the end of my summation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Members of the jury, I will briefly explain my role in this trial and your role. Firstly, my role is I am the authority in relation to the law, and you must accept what I have to say about the law as sacrosanct. That is my function. My function, however, is not to deal with the facts. The facts are for you. And whatever I say in my summing up about the facts, and if you don't agree with what I've said, that is your prerogative, and you will adjudicate accordingly. You may have heard in this country there is something called the burden of proof. It's something that protects all of us, man, woman and child, in this country. And the burden of proof is this: if the Crown makes an allegation against anybody, and in this case it's Mr. Hammer, the Crown must prove it, their case, so that you are sure. So it's a high bar to climb. It is not enough for you to think there's no smoke without fire. That is not enough, members of the jury. You have to be sure that he has committed this offence. The defence have very ably explained the law in relation to sport. You may think, and it is, as I say, a matter for you, that there has been no evidence to suggest that Mr. Hammer was intentional in this alleged assault. So that then leaves, as the defence have quite properly pointed out, the question of recklessness. You will know, as a matter of common parlance, what intention means. It is forming just that, an intention to do something. In this case, it's to commit actual bodily harm. There's no magic about that offence. It's what it says, actual bodily harm. So there's no argument about that. And you may think, and it is a matter for you, that there is no evidence as to Mr. Hammer committing this act of violence intentionally. Why is that important? Because for the defence, the matter doesn't end there. It's been suggested reckless. And it is right that if you take the view that Mr. Hammer was reckless in the injuries that he caused, again, there's no doubt about the fact he caused those injuries, then you can convict. But what is reckless? You may have your own view about what it means to the layman, but I'm bound to tell you that as a matter of law, it is, you must look at what was in fact in Mr. Hamer's mind. Was it a risk that he took, knowing what might happen or believing, contemplating and knowing that the risk might end up injuring Mr. Irwin, as indeed it did. If you accept, and it is a matter for you, that it was an accident in sport, which you might expect, everybody, it's a competitive game, and accidents, you might think, and injuries are caused occasionally. Does it mean that in this case, Mr. Hamer was aware of the risk when he went for the ball and took the risk causing injuries? If you do think that, then you will convict him. What I say in my summing up about any of the witnesses, you might not agree with. It's a matter for you. I'm not here to point out the strengths or weaknesses of any witness, so it is your decision and yours alone. So, to sum up the evidence, you know that, excuse me, going back to what I said earlier, I have to find myself. My apologies. You know that Christy Irwin plays football for Magnal Football Club. It's a team, it's an amateur team, and a particular bad-tempered game. It's described as bad-tempered. I touch on this because reference was made by the prosecution to an incident a week earlier about violence and a violent argument. That is not before you today, and you must ignore it. It's not part of the charge. But in any event, Thor Hammer, it is alleged by the Crown, elbowed Christy in the face as they both contested a header. For this, Thor was sent off for serious foul play by the referee, Andy Moore. Think of that, if you will. Think of that moment when he was given the red card and Mr. Hammer's reaction to that. You will see in many, whether you go to football matches in person or you see them on the television. Often, when a player is disciplined, there is an unpleasant scene that follows, arguments, even threats of violence. This didn't happen. Mr. Hammer accepted the position, and you might think in his evidence today, he emphasised that. This is what happens. He didn't argue. He didn't argue with the referee. He recognised that something had gone wrong, but he said again emphatically he did not intend to commit those injuries. So you may look at that as you wish in the circumstances of the whole case. In any event, you know that the build-up to the game was tense. Insults had been traded between the players. You must look at the allegation that Mr. Hamer said, I would love to beat them on Sunday, and I mean beat them. Do you take that to mean, I mean beat them, an intention to commit violence? Or is it simply it's a matter of emphasis, simply saying, and I mean beat them? Just as a matter of emphasis. That again is a matter for you. So far as the witnesses are concerned, you've heard from Mr. Hamer. I joked back that we need to beat them. It was all a bit of banter. And he said, it's what goes on. And you may think, that's right, banter between teams, perhaps harmless banter. If so, that takes the no prosecution. That doesn't take the prosecution any further if you take that view. And I emphasise that's a matter for you. He said, I accept my red card. I know I will be banned from playing football for a few weeks, and I won't challenge that. But what I did wasn't criminal. Well, again, that's a matter for you, going back to my definition of intention and recklessness. Mr. Moore says, I didn't see what Mr. Hamer was looking at before he hit Mr. Irwin, so he can't take the crown, you may think, any further in trying to establish intention. And he says Mr. Hamer left the field, a punishment which he accepted without further complaint. Mr. Ironman, call for the defence, simply reiterates what Mr. Hamer has said. It happens in football. He's got a heart of gold, said Mr. Ironman. And having heard from Mr. Hammer, you will have formed your own impression of A, whether he's telling the truth, and B, perhaps the kind of personality that he has. Mr. Irwin, he doesn't help the prosecution, it seems to me. You may think. He says we had a gay bit of banter. I was happy to play the game. All I remember about the incident is that the ball was up in the air. I went for the ball. I only had my eyes on the ball. I didn't look around me to see who was around. I just wanted to head the ball back from where it came, nothing clever. Next thing I knew, I'd been clattered and I was lying on my back. So he can't help you, you may think, with the incident because he didn't see it. So far as Kelly Luke is concerned, she's called for the prosecution as the wife of one of the players. She doesn't see the incident. She says it looked like Mr. Hamer was looking directly at Mr. Irwin. And when Mr. Hamer jumped, he put his elbow straight into Irwin's face. But that doesn't negative, it's not, you may think. That doesn't necessarily amount to intention, nor did it help you as to the question of recklessness. So that is the evidence, in summary. It's a matter for you to go away now and come to a decision about guilt or innocence. And argument isn't strengthened by repetition. You may have heard about majority verdicts. You don't need to consider that today. You go away and once you reach a unanimous verdict, all 12 of you can agree, then that verdict will stand. Can the jury be taken out, please? Somebody. It's all right, they've gone. Okay, thank you.